Well, this is going to be experimental because I didn't know how to present the information. There are a number of principles that are involved in the future evolution that we're talking about, and I didn't know whether to include them right in with the information or to separate them out. So I have opted for the latter course. We'll separate some of the principles out, and then we'll do the run through the future evolution. We won't do the run through tonight. That'll be next week. We'll meet every week now, next week and the week following, and then we'll be all done, maybe with this series. I may want to string it out. I don't think I'll be able to. One of the things that we've been doing with this course is breaking down misconceptions. And it's time to do that again. There's a popular misconception around that Jerry Ford can't walk and chew gum at the same time, meaning to say that he can't do two things simultaneously. And that's not true. We're doing a lot of things simultaneously, and to sort of wake you up and me up to the idea of it, we'll play the kids game. It's sort of like a kids game, where you try to understand or experience everything that's going on in a given moment. So you're walking along, and you have the motion of walking, which is maybe 4 miles an hour, something like that. And then you start thinking of the axial rotation. So that means that the Earth, at least at the equator, goes around 22,000 miles every 24 hours. So if you think even at the 43rd parallel, that there's a considerable speed that we're spinning along in the rotation. But then you think of simultaneously at the same time, the Earth is going through its orbit in orbital revolution, and that's a speed of around, I think, 65,000 miles a second or something like that. It's a phenomenal number. And so we're actually not just walking along at 4 miles an hour, we're doing a lot of other things too. But then if we think of the proper motion of the sun in its orbit around within the galactic arm, that's an even faster motion. So we're doing that at the same time. And if you think that the galaxy is, the whole arms of the Milky Way galaxy are whipping around pretty fast, we're going faster yet. So we're really moving along. And then finally, if you think of the proper motion of the Milky Way galaxy itself, around some sort of galactic center, it's in motion, and you can carry on quite far that way until the movement of galaxies and clusters of galaxies, at least if astronomy is correct, it approaches the speed of light. And so what seems to be a very slow pedestrian kind of stroll along is associated with simultaneous other motions. Now all of this is very simple, and it's all limited to one plane, and it's all limited to a few different kinds of motion. What we want to look into now is within the evolutionary creation is there are a lot of other simultaneities going on. And we want to talk about the simultaneities that are in the second half of evolution, the future half. We're sort of very close to the middle of it right now, give or take a few million years, from the middle of the evolution. And we have a long path in front of us. So what I want to do is look at some of the principles and some of the activities that are taking place simultaneously now and carrying into the future. Because if we understand them, then when we go through the run of life into the future, it'll be much easier. We're only going to look at this, though, relative to human activity within evolution. Okay. First, we should look at what the purposes for evolution are, what the creation or the creative experiment set out to do. One, experience. Experience to develop character. That is to say that the divine is becoming as we are becoming, and the whole process of taking things from the absolute is as unknown. In the process of doing a true experiment or doing a true creation, there is new experience. And out of that new experience, the character of God in singular and collectively is developed. The development of soul power. It doesn't seem to me that God is on a power trip, but the ability or to have the potency to create is a very desirable thing when it is integral within a spiritual ethic or within a spiritual morality. And the development of soul power, or the empowerment to love, to give, and to create, is not at all an unreasonable thing. Now, mind you, all of these things we're doing individually, but the whole cosmos is doing this in the creation. 3, development of a creative mind. That is the ability to create, which is to take something from potential, or take the power of the Spirit and literally create. Okay, these are what our goals are. And all of these things are activities that we are going to be pursuing in the future half of evolution. All of these are things that we are going to be becoming. And therefore, they're things that should always be at the front of our mind. That becoming something, having character, you should always be there. Having the ability to do things, to be empowered, and to create. Okay, just very simple. This is going to be more like enumeration tonight than it is going to be a weaving of some very recondite thought. activities that have been going on in the whole of evolution, but will be continued on. We've been talking about them a little bit before. One is materialization of spirit. It's very much like the Bible statement, by their fruits ye shall know them. What we're talking about here is taking spirit and projecting it into the unknown of matter and materializing it. This is a process that we almost take for granted, especially among our relations with each other, with fellow humans. We assume or we take for granted the bodies that we see, the facial expressions that we see, the actions that people perform in their bodies. We take that for granted as all the individual is. But what that is a materialization of the spirit. Our bodies really are temples. They are things that are built for the expression of spirit. They are materializations of the powers and abilities and especially the character of the spirit. Now this is taking place macrocosmically and it's taking place microcosmically. It, like for example, if we take in the mineral world, we see in the mineral world a reflection of the macrocosm, in that every atom with its orbiting electrons or its orbiting foci of energy, we won't necessarily use the word electrons, is a mimic of the solar system, of the whole creation. So that is the basic idea of globes rotating around a center of being or a center of consciousness, is the simplest kind of macrocosmic expression of spirit in matter. And because the spiritual life of the mineral kingdom is so very undeveloped, it has to just mimic the macrocosmic expression of the divine as seen in the solar system. It also takes place, obviously, in human beings. When you look at all of the, like just hearing the people play the piano a few moments ago, with all of the motions and all of the expressions of feeling and everything else that can be materialized out of the spirit. It's very complex. It's a process that involves a direct materialization of a spiritual impulse, or watching someone's face as they go through sequences of expressions, like when they're going through all kinds of emotional changes or discovering all sorts of new ideas, you can see the thoughts break across the face. In order to have developed something like that, that's a very complex manifestation of spirit in matter. On the other hand, there is the spiritualization of matter. That is to say that the stuff of the cosmos, by being taken into our bodies and being influenced by our spiritual expressions, by our creations, by our actions, by our thoughts, by our feelings, actually changes the nature of matter. We've seen that all along, that matter, or the forms that matter take, are constantly evolving, and that those evolutions are parallel and causally parallel with human interaction. So that we're actually, by bringing all of these experiences to matter, we're awakening it, we're spiritualizing it, and we're taking it from the unknown and bringing it into the known. And this is literally true if you take something as simple as just taking copper and having copper be part of the complex mechanism for balancing the iron in the bloodstream so that oxygen is available. Or taking copper and putting it into bronze and making the statue out of it. It's like there's something in that experience that changed it. And the third process that's going on is, how to say it? The extraction of soul. The third coetaneous process is the extraction of soul through the interaction of spirit and matter. Now we have to talk about all kinds of very, very difficult things. Soul. In the way we're using the term, we're not using it as a spiritual individuality. Where you say one is a good soul, or where you say one soul goes to heaven. We're not using it in that way that it's synonymous with a central spiritual focus. The way we are using it is as the essence of experience. We've talked about spirit interfacing with matter through forms, through organisms, through vehicles of consciousness. That consciousness is developed through these vehicles where one interacts. And this is a process where there are events, impacts, moments. And in these moments, the spirit realizes something about matter, and matter is spiritualized, and the essence or the character of that which was unknown before is taken out of matter and absorbed into the spirit. And that is what is called soul. That doesn't invalidate the use of the word when someone says that she was a good soul, because literally the spirit, the threefold spirit, as we've talked about it, having the power of will, the power of imagination, and the power of creative thought, conceptualization of self. When the spirit is basically virgin except according to the experiences that it's had with nature or with the interactions with material. In fact, most of the work that when we were plant-like or when we were animal-like, and certainly when we were mineral-like, we went through these experiences where we had things happen to us, but we were incapable of taking them into us. So the cosmic hierarchies not only formed us and formed our experiences, but they also extracted or sort of quasi-extracted the experience for us, so that we all developed a character of soul. And what we're saying when we say that somebody is a good soul, we're saying that this is someone where the spirit has interacted with matter and has learned the purposes for matter, the purposes for existence, and has experienced these things and has drawn that into the character, spiritual character, and then the spiritual character is what it is because the spirit can be anything because of the experiences it's had. What we are is a result of what we have done or what we have not done. And if we're lacking in a certain power of the spirit, it is because we have not done certain activities. And so then you might say that the soul does go to heaven in a way because the experiences that we draw the essence out of are built into the spirit, and being built into the spirit then has the character of the experiences that it has gone through. Okay. So then we have the objects, which are forms in matter. We have the subjects, which are the foci of spirit that realize those objects. And then we have the essence of the perception, the essence of the experience, which is soul. Now this is an interesting feature, which is something that distinguishes Western spiritual philosophy from ancient Oriental spiritual philosophies. The notion is that experience, especially fully realized experience, produces soul, and this soul not only flavors the spirit and not only unfolds the powers of the spirit, but actually feeds it. The word that is used is pablum. And pablum is the simplest, most elementary kind of food that we feed to an infant, because the digestion, it's food broken down so that the digestion and taking in of it is easily done. Now this is a big distinguishing, because a big difference between the modern Western philosophies and the more ancient philosophies, because it determines how we live our lives. If the spirit is indeed fed and it grows and it develops powers, and not just unfolds powers that were already there, that means the more experience that we have, as long as we're still growing from that experience, the more the powers of the Spirit will be fulfilled. Therefore, the philosophy that is behind this is that we do not try to escape or eschew the worlds of matter as soon as we hear that there is a spiritual state of being and that we can be freed from pain and suffering and agony and all of that, but that instead of trying to escape, we try to fulfill the intents, the purposes, and gain as much and give as much as we can to matter. So it's a totally different philosophy. It is not a cosmic escapism. It is a spiritually responsible point of view. That this is not to criticize the earlier outlooks, because the earlier outlooks were just when people were suffering and didn't know why they had to be brought into matter that much and thought it was great to get out if they could. After we've suffered for a while and we realize the value of it, it's almost like having a child. You suffer with the infant, and then you realize how wonderful it is to go through that experience, and it's so much better than if you hadn't done it. And so there is indeed a soul growth. And there is indeed a spiritual growth. It's not just unfoldment of spirit. But because of that, we have to be careful that we don't, like just because we experience a lot of things, we have to avoid a lot of pride. I think one of the downfalls of the Western philosophies that have always been that way since everything that could be called Western, from the Greeks on, have suffered from very great pride. The Greeks were really the first Western thinkers. It almost divides between Plato and Aristotle. Plato was still quite Oriental yet, and Aristotle was decidedly Occidental. But if you look at the myths, the downfalls of all of the people, of all of the heroes in the myths in the West, have been downfalls of pride. Now, there are different flavors of soul. And it's a very tricky issue, so I'll try to explain the words as I experience them, but not considering myself exceptionally soulful. You'll see why when you see the descriptions. I'm not sure that my descriptions are completely right. First off, the first part of the spirit, threefold spirit that was awakened, was the divine spirit. And the divine spirit is reflected in the physical body. And what it produces is called conscious soul. And conscious soul is like an impact awakening. And what it is spiritual knowledge of matter. All right, now that we've got the words written down, let's try to experience in ourselves what they mean. The divine soul is associated with the power of will. And in its most essential nature, it is. It is the will to be. And as long as we continue to exist, that is an assertion of divine spirit. And the divine spirit then reflects itself most deeply into the material worlds, right down to the physical. So it's easy to see how some people fall into the superstition that God is a great big human, usually pictured in a masculine gender. And so the physical body then is an expression of the assertion of the will to be. And out of willing to be and taking the deepest form of resistance, where matter is most condensed, most concentrated, most thick, is where we get conscious soul. It's like by, all of our experience of the external world, we either force the world to change through our metabolism. The basic metabolism is associated with the divine spirit, whereas like the human spirit is associated with the nervous system, where all of the neural impulses are, whereas all of the rhythms in the body that sustain the life, there's, like the breathing and the heartbeat and all of that are associated with the life spirit. But when we move something physically, which I've been doing quite a bit of lately, in fact, I feel different because I have muscles, that kind of impact on the external world, or of the external world on us through senses. All of our senses are senses of pain. Like eyes develop as a response to light. And even pleasurable sensations are sensations of pain, because the nerves feel by being pressed on. And though the pain is very mild, and it can communicate in its gentleness a very pleasant attitude behind it, sort of like when you're walking along and it's a clear day with the sun and you can just feel the air, cool air lay on your skin. That's really a pain, but it's a wonderful, beautiful kind of thing. So the conscious soul is by having these experiences, by our perception of the world, by looking at things, by hearing things, by smelling them, touching them, and by moving them and trying to change them, we begin to understand what the essence of form is, what the essence of matter is, so that we can feel a form and know something about the nature of form itself and of that form. And there are people who I work with some people that are really knowledgeable in this. They know what material is. And to work with them, quite a few of them are expert technicians. And they know the limits, they know the qualities of materials. They know what they, it's like an artist knows just how much you can get out of a paint, or how much you can get out of a piece of stone. And so conscious soul is the degree of waking to essential being. You might say it's because I impact, I know I am. And further, conscious soul is not only the awareness of simple being in form, but it is understanding the form itself and the stuff that the form is made in. Okay. Then we have the life spirit. And the life spirit is reflected in the vital body. And what is taken out of it is called intellectual soul. Make sure I get the words that I thought were most appropriate. All right, we said that the life spirit is the divine feminine in the same way that the divine spirit is the divine masculine. In the same way that the divine spirit projects itself as actions of will, the life spirit expresses itself through the reception of imagination. These are the two universal aspects of spirit. Neither of them can manifest anything by itself alone. A pure statement of will not result in a creation. Neither will a pure attraction of imagination. And you might say it is a twofold process, that if you poke yourself and your finger sinks in, they're both part of the same thing. One is the finger pushing in, and from the spiritual point of view, the other is the imagination drawing the finger into it. And so, all creation is a consequence of the reception of impulses of will, or the actual drawing out of impulses of will and extending it so that it isn't just a static being. It brings it to life by drawing it out, by extending it over a conceptive whole. Now, when we're talking about imagination here, we're not talking about the forming of a picture, though that is a type of imagination. We're talking about an imagination that is para-pictorial. We're talking about the imagination being the ability to conceive receiving any kind of impulse of will. That's a very, very deep conception. The imagination of imagination itself is what we're talking about. And this is reflected in a vital body. And a vital body is in us where we have our vitality, where we have our life. When we say that somebody is vital, it means that they're active. Children, when they're most active in the vital body period between 7 and 14, are unstoppable in their action. They just go and go and go, and at the same time, they're growing unstoppably. They just, it's all like almost a 7-year continuous spurt of growth. Doesn't mean that it quits afterwards, but it's a great spurt. But actions all have reactions. Growth also has decay. And the experience of actions and counteractions results in an intellectual awareness of the meaning of action, of the meaning of vital growth, and hence the name intellectual soul. So in one case, it is the impact, it is the stuff itself that awakens, or that we are awakened to. In the other case, it is a matter of being aware of the action involved in the experience, of the life involved in the experience, of the process involved. This is why, for example, there is the word karma. That word literally means action. And the intellectual understanding of the experience that we garner in taking actions or in not taking actions results in an intellectual awareness of karma. And the collective experience of vital life active process, the continued collective experience of that produces an awareness of what kinds of actions produce what kind of results. And some of those are favorable to evolution or to the stage of evolution, and some of those are unfavorable to evolution. And if we are associated with the evolution, which is God's creative plan, and that in itself is the good, the harmony with the character of that, which is the character of God, is either sympathetic to fulfilling those ends or antipathetic to the fulfillment of that. So when we understand, when we say that there is a sympathy for a given cause, that is something that we have gained by intellectually acting on the subject of that cause and experiencing the validity of that cause as part of the cosmos. Right now there could be many apparently divergent causes because our experience of action is so limited, and there's room for all kinds of things, and some people can seem to be going even counter to each other and having sympathies and antipathies. But the more deeply we put ourselves in touch with the central purposes, with the intent of the divine plan, the more keenly we feel sympathy through our actions and the consequences of our actions, or antipathy through the consequences of our actions. And that ability to understand whether something works with evolution or works counter to it is called intellectual soul. All right, then we have the human spirit. And it is reflected in the desire body. And it produces emotional soul, which is sometimes called sentient soul. And that is the awakening. Let's just put it in words, feel awakening. And that results in, flavors of character. Emotional soul is what most people call soul. When they say that's a very soulful man, they're talking usually about emotional soul. All right, we know that the human spirit is the child, the androgyne child that is born of the divine spirit and the life spirit. It is formed in the region of ideational thought, and the basic idea that is thought is the idea of self. And that differentiates each self relative to self of the cosmos. And that is reflected in the desire body. We've talked about it before that the divine spirit is like power, and the life spirit is the light that draws out of that power. And when that light is broken up into all different individual varieties of color, it's called emotional soul. When we feel things, and we feel them deeply, especially the wide variety of feelings that are available, like through the arts, or things where you know, for the most part, our feelings are very much on lack of development, because there are most of the time we're pretty blah. We don't have any feelings. You know, like in Romanticism, there are all kinds of different feelings, and as we awake to them by living them, it's like, you might say, and I think this is a very valid use of it. It's like putting on clothes. Joseph's coat of many colors, or if you look at a lot of the coffins of the Egyptians, they're filled with little chips of colors. Those are expressions or intimations of the desire nature. If we truly come into our being, we should be a whole spectrum. We should be what are called colorful people. Because from that, we don't just see light, but we see all of the different characteristics light can express. And the essence of feeling those feelings without having to be motivated to this kind of desire or that kind of desire or this kind of emotionalism, but the ability to extract the essence out of a feeling without having to re-feel it again or to be stuck in it, but to be able to extract the essence of that is what emotional soul is. So with that, if we say that a person has a lot of emotional soul, it is somebody who understands the emotions and could manifest them if so desired. But it is a free act. But it's clear that some people are compassionate. And in their compassion, other people recognize that their feelings are resonating to the person who is soulful. And even though that person isn't going through those emotions. You know, what I'm trying to say, if you go to some people with your feelings, with the problems that you're going through, it's clear, even though some of the people are professional counselors, it's clear that they are not compassionate because they cannot understand the feelings you're going through because they haven't had anything like that, or they haven't extracted the essence of it into themselves. On the other hand, there are people, it could be janitors, but it could very well be a psychiatrist, who, not intellectually, but in their own feelings, have felt those things and have extracted the essence out so that they know what it really means. So they've gotten something out of it. That is a description of what I think emotional soul is. Okay, so we've looked at two of the kinds of activities that are going on. One has to do with the spiritualization of matter and the materializing of spirit. And we've looked now at the extraction of soul. These are things that are going on all the time. Obviously, you can see they're interconnected, because if you're drawing the soul out of your experiences, then you're capable then of better materializing spirit creatively the next time around. Okay. Now all of this is taking place in a process that is triadic, if you like, or septenary, if you like. Let's look at it first in a triadic sense. 1, there is involution. 2, there is evolution. And 3, there is epigenesis. Involution means rotating or spinning into. This is the process where the divine, where spirit spins itself more and more deeply into matter. It is a forward-going activity. We talked about this in the past. We talked about that during each of the cosmic days, the Saturn period, the Sun period, the Moon period, in each successive one, the involution became deeper. And then there was a relaxation or a withdrawal back into pure spirit. And then there was a further manifestation, a further involution. It is the ability to go into matter through developing forms in matter that is involved in involution. We can see in the forms in matter that are expressions of the spirit how deep the involution is. If we look in a stone, it's not very deep at all. That it's hard recognizing that there is a spiritual nature to a stone even. But if we look at a plant, even though it has the same chemical substances that are in the mineral kingdom, it's using the same minerals, it's much softer. But then when you compare the plant, which often is very woody and not at all expressive like an animal, or even further like a human, we can see that progressive involution into matter produces a greater change in the matter where the matter itself is soft. It's pliable, it's responsive. There are many more capabilities with the deeper the involution. Evolution, or evos, like we use the same, it's the same prefix as we use in evict, or to put something out, is the process of coming out of evolution. Coming out of matter, withdrawing, extracting ourselves from it, is a matter of fulfilling our potentials, our purposes, our intents, and a matter of expelling things built into us by the gods. Because really we were the playthings of the gods. They enjoyed making us into different things, carrying us through different experiences, very much the way a child enjoys playing with its toys. And a child can put a lot of life into its toys. And so the process of evolution is taking the principles that were built into us by the gods and fulfilling them. The gods built into us the ability to want things. And when we, as a free act of will, motivate ourselves to do things, to want things, we are fulfilling the purpose. The examples of this come when we take the things from the raw macrocosmic principles of nature and we build them in ourselves. I don't know how to say it. If we take something like a lever outside of ourselves and have it inside of us, or actually build it inside of us, or an even better example is we're all responsive to the forces of the gods working through the energies emanated or reflected out of the planets, and we're all responsive in a 28-day cycle to the moon. But when we take that principle of the moon and internalize it, we develop our own biorhythm. And everybody has their own individual 28-day biorhythm. And that biorhythm is not paralleled or correlated with the 28-day cycle of the moon externally. It is something that we have taken an external quality of nature from the gods and we have established it in ourselves. Almost every cycle that can be found in the cosmos can be found internally in humans. And every principle that is found in physics or in chemistry is taken into the individual, and it can actually be controlled. Like by the power of the spiritual will, we can control the chemistry and we can use it as we will. Hence we have stories of people who can drink poison and not be affected by it and such like that. Epigenesis means going back to creation. And it means that the whole process of involving and evolving is done creatively. We are becoming divine. And we have, I think, a couple different kinds of creativity available to us. One is a very direct creativity where we make objects of art or we make things. Of course, better than these bookshelves out here that I made. But it's a creation. It's where we have taken something and we have made it on our own. That's a direct kind of creation. But our creative work, when we're talking about the future of evolution, is also indirect, meaning it is cosmic and universal, and it isn't just limited to small objects of creation, it's to the whole cosmos itself. Literally, as each of us goes through the evolution, the second half, the first half is called involution, the second half is called evolution, and all along there is epigenesis, but especially in the second half, we discover the whole cosmos. We talked about in evolution expelling the influences of the gods, and when we expel them creatively, that is what our work is. So literally, God had this conception of a solar manifestation. But it was like the work of a great symphony in which the symphony is carried out, but there is room not only for interpretation, but of creating it differently from each individual self. Each little God with a small g can create it in its own understanding, and it's a recreation of the cosmos, and that gets fed back to God. So even though there is one solar cosmos that we're in, it's actually multitude. And it is our duty, each of us, to form our own unique insight where we give of ourselves to the creation and see it in our own unique way. Part of this, you might say, is a process that has to do with awakening. This triad is actually quaternary. We began as things. We began as objects being worked on by the gods. Our only consciousness was that which was superimposed on us by the divine, and it was brought to us by vague experiences. That's what the involutionary part is like. Now we're right in the middle, and we're aware. And it's a peculiar thing that when we're aware of both the internal and the external at the same time. If you want to deepen your inner experience, you can't do that without also at the same time deepening your outer experience. And so we are now becoming fully aware and awake internally and externally. Now we are becoming externalizers rather than having forces work on us and being receptive objects. We are becoming creative subjects, and we are pouring out and externalizing. So we are gaining freedom in that process. Now if we want to, this is going to be long. I didn't realize that I had this much material. Is there another tape around there so that we can run the audio tape into a second? Great. We can look at this relative to the 7 stages. I'm going to whip through this really quickly because otherwise it would get way too long. I could spend a long time on this also. If you remember, the first stage was a mineral stage. And in the mineral stage, we provided stuff. We provided form by resisting change and accepting it. Which is, it's because of the resistance of form in minerals that our legs hold together as columns of stone, the bones. So it's both a resistance and a compliance. Then we passed through the second stage, which is a plant stage, and we were worked on. And as we were worked on, instead of providing merely form, we provided vitality. We sustained and extended forms through life and vitality, and we grew. In the third stage, we specialized emotion and desire by activating and using forms, detaching them from a common macrocosmic form, detaching them and using them. Now in the fourth or human stage, we're doing several things. We're specializing thought, and in that, we're finding meaning in life. We are creating and sustaining life forms as extensions of ourselves. We are completely responsible for our bodies. The gods don't do it for us anymore. We're responsible. And we're also doing something that in each of the first 3 stages, the involutionary stages, we didn't do before. We are using the mind to extract the soul from our experiences and bring it into our consciousness and to bring it into our spiritual ability. The 6th stage is the archangelic stage, where we find meaning and purpose in desire. Instead of just merely, how to say it? In the human stage, we produce forms. And we understand forms. We bring consciousness to ourselves through forms. In the angelic stage, we find meaning in our mind of life. I was a little incorrect the first time through. And that is, we bring life to form. And we extract the meaning of life, not the meaning of form, but the meaning of life, we extract with our mind and bring that into our soul nature. Finally, almost finally, in the 6th stage, in the archangelic stage, we externalize or we specialize desire. And the mind finds the meaning of desire. The only difference is that instead of having life forms that have to be within our sphere, we can set them apart from ourselves. And we have very objective creations. And finally, in the 7th stage, when we become what are called powers or power-like, which some people call archai, we find the meaning of meaning. That is, we find the meaning of thought. We give meaning to meaning. We give creatively to thought. And we withdraw all consciousness through the process of thinking about thinking. All right, I'm not going to talk much about that now. The next time we'll talk much more about it. Now there are a few things I want to mention. I won't go extensively into them. All of this takes place within the form of the primordial atom. We're not going to talk this time about all the periods and revolutions and globes, but I want to talk about some other features of the primordial atom. One is this is done with reflective symmetry. That is to say that there is a symmetry in the same way that there was a symmetry with developing the physical body and the potential of the divine spirit at one time. There will be a symmetry where there is a fulfillment of the divine spirit, which will be a reflection of the period of the development of the physical body and the potential for the divine spirit. So what I'm saying is, if you have a cycle, just think of this as a multidimensional cycle, and you're going deeper and deeper into matter, when you dive into this level or this level or this level and finally reach a turning point and turn around, when you're coming out, you have to go through the same planes that you went through on the way in. You always go out the same route that you went in. And then there is a reflection. If this had to do with the development or the manifestation of form, then this has to do with the manifestation of divine power of will. And so there's a reflective symmetry in everything that is done. And there will be then a remembrance of everything that has been done. And remembrance is extremely important. The best example of the reflective symmetry is we go through it every day. We take our clothes off and we put our clothes on. And I consciously do this every time I put my clothes on. I consciously remember the order of putting on clothes so that one thing is flowing over the top of another, over the top. I put my shirt on before I put my slacks on because the slacks are going to go over my shirt, except if I'm going to wear the shirt with it. And when I undress, I think of that because you can't take your underwear off first. You probably could, but it would be a difficult job. But when you're doing that, that's the sort of thing that you're doing. You're looking at the thing that came just before, the thing that came just before. And this is the principle that is involved in two statements in the Bible. It is, and the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Or, he that cometh after me is preferred before me because he was before me. If this is our state right now, and there's something that subtends our state of being, and it comes after our period of being, it had to have been there before our period of being, because this whole realm subtends and is antecedent to our material kind of existence right now. And so what we're talking about is that when we're talking about unclothing ourselves physically and looking deeper and deeper and deeper within, and the last things that we experience, which is the physical as the physical, are the first things to go. Okay, I don't want to talk about that because it would get too long. I'm very sorry I made all of these notes because I guess I was inspired. It was so good to not be doing something physical for a while that I really dug in and worked hard at it. Okay, I want to look at some more at the primordial atom, and I want to look at some of the features relative to the globes of matter. Up until now, each globe, each world that we have been getting into has been more and more and more dense. There's been an increasing concentration and densification of matter. Likewise, there has been a contraction and a condensation of the cosmos. Eventually this carries on, but it goes in a strange way. It's described something like black holes are described in astrophysics. Only it was described better many years before by spiritual students. Eventually, things collapse into a point. They get so dense that they collapse into a point and they pass through and turn up elsewhere in a diffuse state. So what we're talking about is that the cosmos is going to continue its condensation, but in the process of condensing, we are going to pass through it. You know what I'm trying to say? That an object becomes more and more real to us, and we look into it more and more deeply, or we experience it more deeply until we pass through it. We don't withdraw from it. We pass through it, but there still is a withdrawal. Relative to the periods of time, talking about the primordial atom, the first periods, because there was less material resistance And because we had not really gone deeply into things and we were dealing on a very simple period of time, the earlier periods proceeded faster. And the more deeply we got into matter, the more things slowed down. Now, this is a difficult thing to understand. I think it can only be understood with momental time or with cyclical, the type of time we were talking about in the last talk. I don't remember the exact terms I was using there. Because our time right now is very linear. We see objects moving, and according to the regularity of their movement, we call that time. And those objects aren't even going to be there, or weren't there, or there wasn't anything like them in the earlier periods. And therefore, time had to be measured more as a spiritual experience. And so the spiritual experience has been going slower and slower and slower. But our concentration has been getting better. Our focus of spirit has been getting better. And therefore, as we pass through in the material sense, things will speed up. But when they speed up, this is a very curious thing. They won't be like a runaway train. They'll speed up, but it'll seem very gradual and constant. Because our rate of, or our degree of spiritual awareness, I hate to use the word vibration, but our modulation of consciousness will become more and more thick so that it'll be eternal. This is why I think that Christ is called the rock, because it is a complete awareness, and all of the modulations seem to be standing still all the time because things are going so fast that they're continuous. And gradually, also, the spirit becomes attenuated. The spirit is not just focused with just a little ego, but it is spread out throughout the entire cosmos. But it's thicker throughout the entire cosmos as time goes on. I don't know how to say it, because that soul material is not limited by matter. Even though we may have learned it through a very simple material experience, it can be spread to the entire cosmos. And therefore, we being very rare individuals, being in a physical body, unfolding conscious soul with the greatest of rigor, if we take that and objectify it to the entire cosmos, we're offering something really very great. Relative to the revolutions of consciousness, we've talked about the globes, and we've talked about the periods, and now it's time to talk about the revolutions of consciousness. As we change our consciousness, as we revolve through the interactions of spirit and matter, we continue to perfect forms. And with this, we have continuously perfected consciousness. I don't know how to say it. We're awakening to more and more and more events in more dimensions, in more directions, all the time. So our consciousness is getting clearer, it's expanding, it's being sped up to eternity, and oh boy, how to say this? It is what affects the changes in both spirit and matter. We've talked about the changes in matter with the globes and the changes in spirit when we're talking about the periods. But the interaction between the two of them, spirit and matter, in moments or events that we awaken our consciousness, produces a decadence. Like all of these forms that we build, and that we perfect and we become conscious through, we break down. The most severe example is severing a nerve. It's very painful, and then it's numb afterwards. It's gone into decadence. And the whole process of breaking up the different worlds, of breaking up the different forms and withdrawing from them, is a process of having greater and greater consciousness. All right, now I want to talk about just a few general features of the process of future evolution, and quite a few of them are paradoxical. One is that we are withdrawing from matter by going into it. I've mentioned it before, but I just want to repeat it because of the paradoxical nature of it. If we withdraw from material experience by not interacting, it demands it of us. I can tell you from my own experience, by ignoring the demands of the physical nature, of the lower nature, they have only gotten stronger and out of my control. But by going into it and passing through it, we dissolve it. It is that very attitude of outgrowing it rather than pulling away from it that breaks it down. Because we are withdrawing, at the same time we are going forward and perfecting creation. See, it's funny that we're perfecting our creations at the same time our creations are going into decadence. At the same time that, in the same way that we're withdrawing, while still completing and perfecting things, it produces two streams of consciousness in us, two forms of rotation. One, a forward-going rotation, and with that forward-going rotation, we complete the work of each of the vehicles, the physical body, the vital body, the desire body, as well as many things along the way. We complete them, we carry them out to their fullest. We talked last time about at the fourth, something is brought to fruition and fulfillment. So we continue to go forward in that wise, but at the same time when we pass through, we begin withdrawing. Because we're using our mind to create, but when we have the moments of experience, we also remember. And those remembrances superimpose a anticyclic revolution in us. So the cosmos is both winding forward and unwinding at the same time. There is an illusion that is something like that. If you take a spoked wheel and get it going at a certain speed, it appears like the spokes are going backwards while they're really going forward. That's an optical illusion, and it depends on the size of the spokes and the speed of the rotation. But something like that is taking place, that while we're going forward and accomplishing things, we're also unwinding by remembering. Remembrance is the agency then for the collapse of matter. When we withdraw the essence from matter, there's no reason for it to exist. It is also what produces the acceleration of consciousness, because when we remember the experiences and bring them as soul into the spirit through the process of remembering, we accelerate the spirit. And it also accelerates the spiritualization in matter. By remembering things, you know why you're doing things as you're doing them. And all of the creative activity of the second half, the evolutionary half, is a giving, and that is a love. And the voluntarily withdrawing the experiences, while at the same time we're throwing things off, like we're throwing the gods out and we're throwing these creations out. It's such a beautiful paradox. At the same time we're withdrawing through memory, we're throwing all of these things out, and in order to expel them, we have to expel them with love. So it's easy to see how people can get stuck in sentiment, remembering the good old days and then indulging themselves in those kinds of memories. But if we experience things in memory dispersonally, because now we're becoming divine and we're remembering them because we're feeding God, and because this is our way to create is through remembrance. When we remember in that way, it's a very great act of love, and it's not an indulgent sentiment like old buddies getting together and getting soused and living in the past. This is really interesting because it fulfills, if you're familiar with all of the arts were produced by Zeus, the highest aspect of the spirit to the Greeks, by being married to Nemasa, memory. That's a little sideline, and it also it points out something really, really novel, that the best way to forget something about it is to remember it. If you remember something dispersonally and get the full experience out of it, then you can forget about it, because it won't be a bothering kind of memory. You can call it back if you want, but it's a remembering to forget. Another thing that's interesting in this is that the more our creative powers increase, the more things are sped up, and the more we are remembering, the more deeply we have to go back into our being to remember. It's a very Oedipal type of experience. The more deeply we have to go back into ourselves to draw on something way, way back to create. It's almost like it's a game that is played among some occultists in a way. With some people, you have to be careful how you think. Because if you think with pictures in the etheric world, people will start picking up on your pictures and on your thoughts. So then you have to learn a more subtle kind of thinking. You have to think so that your thoughts never get to the desire world. Get to the desire world and no deeper. And eventually you have to, you know what I'm trying to say? You have to get, because if you want to hide something, or if you don't want to spoil something for somebody, you have to get more and more subtle as you go, until you get to the region of life spirit. Then you can't hide anything anymore, because everything is known to everyone as knowing it takes place. But it's something like that. The more we remember, the more it's sort of like Wagner's operas. He wrote the words to the last of the ring cycle first, and he said, no, that kind of experience, the death of a hero, has to be preceded by the life of a hero. And so then he wrote Siegfried to precede that. But he said, no, but where did Siegfried come from? Siegfried had to have roots. And then he wrote the Valkyrie before that. And then he said, but the Valkyrie had to have an origin somewhere, and they had to have it in the gods. And then he wrote the words to the Rheingold, which goes way back deep into spiritual history. So it's sort of like our experience, we have to see what came before it, or what is antecedent to that, or what is antecedent to that. And in order to create, we have to go more and more deeply into ourselves, so we can find this antecedent kind of reflection again. And this ability of freeing ourselves from more of our memories and freeing ourselves from more and more influences of the gods is coincident with our ability to create in such a way that we give our creations greater and greater autonomy. Because psychiatrists would say, well, if you're less insecure, then you can trust that your students are going to pick things up without having to have everything explained for them. Some people follow this all the way to the point that some teachers, like the great spiritual teachers in the East, feel that after a certain point they should just be silent. They don't talk anymore for the rest of their lives because they figure that that's the best way to communicate with their students. A few other things to talk about here very quickly. One little thing, generalization. As we progress through the second half of evolution, there is more true generalization and less specialization. That is to say, in very simple ways. First of all of our senses. What used to be limited to certain parts of the body, touch, is now generalized to the whole body. Eventually, all of our senses will be generalized to the entire body. But the generalization goes even further than that. As we become stronger in ourselves, and as we become more universal in spirit, and we're sharing the common unity and we have nothing to defend, all of our experience becomes more generalized to other people and theirs to ours. We no longer live a petty life doing our own little thing, having a personalized kind of experience. We have a more generalized life, and we live a life that is a much bigger kind of life.